You may be shocked to discover over half of Aston Martin drivers have had at least one speeding ticket. But what is their darkest secret? Churning out vehicles to be used in the Great War? Or best keeping some wild scandals only a few know about? Which star got busted doing 200? And how did one owner outrun the cops in their Vanquish? Here, we share everything they don't want you to know. Stay tuned for the shocking reveal if you dare. Oh, and be sure to satisfy your curiosity. One click on the subscribe button makes you a member of our community. Chapter 1. The Birth of a Legend. The year was 1913, and the world stood on the brink of ruin. Across Europe, tensions were rising as the great powers eyed each other with growing suspicion and fear. But in a dim workshop in London's seedy East End, a different kind of favor was taking hold. Two engineers, Lionel Martin and Robert Bamford, toiled night and day on their dark endeavor, a machine that would combine lethal speed and grace like no other. Martin was a cutthroat businessman who owned a chop shop on the wrong side of Thames, but in secret, he nurtured a passion for danger, competing in the treacherous hill climb races that dotted the countryside. Many had died attempting the sheer cliffs and sheer drops, but Martin had conquered them all. Bamford was Martin's right-hand man, a shadowy figure who seemed to live for machinery and mechanics alone. Together they nursed grand designs of domination. They would call their company Aston Martin, named for the deadly slopes where Martin had cemented his reputation. Their motto, power, beauty, and the will to dominate, spoke to their black-hearted ambition to build automobiles unlike anything the world had seen. Cars that were not only swift and brutal, but elegant instruments of control. In their workshop in the gathering gloom, the future of motoring was taking sinister shape. Their first car, the Aston Martin Red Dragon, was a masterpiece of design and engineering. It was based on a 1908 Isata Fraschini chassis, which they modified and improved with a new engine, suspension, brakes, and bodywork. The car was painted with a striking red color, which gave it its name. The Red Dragon was renowned for its beauty and performance, and it won many races and awards. Martin and Bamford were proud of their creation, and they soon attracted the attention of wealthy and influential customers, who were impressed by the quality and style of their cars. Aston Martin quickly gained a reputation as a maker of luxury sports cars, and it was on its way to becoming a legend. But the road ahead was not smooth, and Aston Martin would face many challenges and hardships in its history. The Red Dragon's success brought more orders than the small workshop could handle. Martin and Bamford worked tirelessly to fulfill each commission, striving for perfection in every detail. However, the demands of the work began to take their toll. Long hours were spent hunched over engine parts or bent over drawings at their drafting tables. Money was tight as more materials had to be purchased up front while waiting for payment from customers. Arguments arose over design decisions or production delays. Stress fractured the partnership that had accomplished so much already. After 2 years of growing tensions, the friends had a bitter falling out in 1912. Martin left the company he had helped establish. Bamford took sole control of Aston Martin, but the loss of his original collaborator left a dark shadow over the future. Without the creative talents of both men working in tandem, something integral was now missing. Bamford struggled alone for a few more years, but the magic was gone. The Red Dragon remained their most famous creation, a symbol of what they had achieved at the height of their partnership. But its brilliant red paint seemed faded now, as if reflecting the faded dreams of its creators. Chapter 2. Stormy Skies Ahead. The 1930s were a decade of despair and misery for the world. As the global economy crashed and plunged into the Great Depression, the stock market collapse of 1929 triggered a chain of events that led to a worldwide economic downturn, which lasted until the late 1930s or early 1940s. Millions of people lost their jobs, homes, and savings, and struggled to survive in the face of hunger, disease, and violence. The social and political unrest that followed the crises also gave rise to totalitarian regimes and extremist movements, such as fascism and communism, which threatened the peace and stability of the world. The luxury car market, which depended on the wealthy and the elite, was one of the hardest hit by the crisis, and Aston Martin was no exception. The company, which had been founded in 1913 by Lionel Martin and Robert Bamford, had a reputation for making elegant and powerful sports cars, which combined performance, style, and craftsmanship. The company had achieved some success and recognition in the 1920s, especially in racing competitions, such as the Le Mans and the Brooklands, but it found no buyers for its expensive and exclusive models, such as the International and the Le Mans. In the depressed market of the 1930s, the company was drowning in financial troubles and debts, and it was on the verge of collapse. To survive, Aston Martin had to make some drastic and painful changes. It slashed its staff, laying off many of its skilled and loyal workers who had devoted their time and talent to the company. It moved to a smaller and cheaper factory in Feltham, leaving behind its spacious and modern premises in Kensington. It changed its ownership several times, passing from one investor to another who had little interest or vision for the company. Some of them, such as Augustus Bertelli and Gordon Sutherland, tried to revive the company by introducing new models and innovations, but they faced many challenges and obstacles, such as lack of funds, technical difficulties, and legal disputes. The company also tried to diversify its products by making cheaper and smaller cars, such as the Atom and the Speed model, which were more affordable and practical for the masses. However, these efforts were not enough to save the company from bankruptcy, and it was forced to close its doors in 1936. In 1939, the world was plunged into another catastrophe, World War II. The war brought devastation and destruction to many countries, and it also affected the car industry. Aston Martin, like many other car manufacturers, had to stop making sports cars and switch to making military vehicles. To support the war effort and the national defense, the company produced aircraft components, such as engine parts, fuel tanks, and gun mounts, which were vital for the British Air Force. It also made armored vehicles, trucks, and ambulances, which were used by the British Army and the Allies. Aston Martin's contribution to the war effort was significant, and it earned the respect and gratitude of the British government and the public. But the war also took a toll on the company's resources and facilities. The factory was damaged by bombing raids, and many of the machines and tools were destroyed or stolen. Many of the workers were drafted or killed, and the remaining ones had to work long and hard hours, under constant threat and stress. By the end of the war, Aston Martin was in a dire situation, and it faced an uncertain future. But the company was not ready to give up, and it had a secret weapon that would reignite its passion and reputation. A new car that would change the history of Aston Martin and the world of sports cars. Chapter 3: Reigniting the Passion. The war was over, and the world was ready for a new era of peace and prosperity. But for Aston Martin, the post-war period was not easy. The company had lost most of its assets and staff, and it had no new models to offer. It needed a miracle to survive and revive its glory. The miracle came in the form of a man named David Brown, a wealthy industrialist who had a passion for cars. In 1947, he bought Aston Martin for €20,500, and he also acquired Lagonda, another British car maker that specialized in luxury vehicles. He merged the two companies and formed the Aston Martin Lagonda Ltd. He also hired a talented team of engineers and designers, led by W.O. Bentley, the founder of Bentley Motors, and a renowned expert in car engineering. He gave them the freedom and resources to create the best cars possible, and he supported their vision and ambition. David Brown had a vision for making Aston Martin the best sports car brand in the world. He wanted to make cars that were fast, reliable, and elegant. He wanted to combine the performance and the style of Aston Martin with the comfort and quality of Lagonda. He also wanted to compete in the most prestigious racing events, such as the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the world's oldest and most famous endurance race, where the cars had to prove their speed, durability, and endurance. To achieve his vision, he launched a new series of cars, named after his initials, the DB series. The first car in the series was the DB1, which was based on the pre-war Atom prototype, a car that had been designed by Claude Hill during the war. It was a light and agile car, with a 4-cylinder engine and a tubular chassis. It was a modest success, but it was not enough to impress the critics and the customers, who expected more from Aston Martin. The real breakthrough came in 1950 when Aston Martin unveiled the DB2, the car that would change the history of Aston Martin and the world of sports cars. The DB2 was a masterpiece of design and engineering. It had a sleek and aerodynamic body made of lightweight aluminum, which reduced the weight and drag of the car. It had a powerful and reliable engine derived from the Lagonda V12, which had been modified and improved by W.O. Bentley and his team. It had a spacious and comfortable interior with leather seats and wood trim, which offered luxury and convenience to the driver and the passengers. It had a top speed of over 190 kilometers per hour, and it could accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 11 seconds, which made it one of the fastest cars of its time. The DB2 was an instant hit, and it received rave reviews from the press and the public. It was praised for its beauty and performance, and it was compared to the best cars of its time, such as the Ferrari and the Jaguar. It was also a success in the racing scene, and it won many trophies and awards. It was the first Aston Martin to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1950, and it repeated the feat in 1951, beating many of its rivals and competitors. It also won many other races, such as the Mille Miglia, the Spa 24 Hours, and the Tourist Trophy. The DB2 was the car that reignited the passion and reputation of Aston Martin, and it established the company as a leader in the sports car industry. It was also the car that inspired many other legendary models, such as the DB4, the DB5, and the DB6, which continued the tradition and the legacy of the DB series. But the DB2 was not only a car, it was also a star. It was the car that caught the eye of a famous writer who chose it for its most famous character, Bond, James Bond. Ian Fleming, the creator of the fictional spy, was a fan of Aston Martin. He decided to give his hero a DB2 in his novel Goldfinger, published in 1959. The DB2 was the first car to be associated with James Bond, and it started a long and successful partnership between Aston Martin and the Bond franchise, which would last for decades and generations. Chapter 4. A Bond. A James Bond. James Bond is the world's most famous fictional spy, created by the British writer Ian Fleming in 1953. He's known for his charisma, skills, gadgets, and of course, his cars. But did you know that James Bond's first car was not an Aston Martin, but a Bentley? That's right. The original novels by Fleming, Bond drove a 1933 Bentley 4.5 liter, which he modified with the supercharger and concealed weapon compartment. He used this car until the novel Goldfinger, where he switched to an Aston Martin DB Mark III, which he also customized with various gadgets, such as a radar, a homing device, and a smokescreen. The Bentley was a classic and elegant car, which reflected Bond's refined and sophisticated taste. It was also a fast and powerful car, which suited Bond's adventurous and daring personality. But the car that made Aston Martin and James Bond synonymous was the DB5, which appeared in the film adaptation of Goldfinger in 1964. The DB5 was a stunning car with a sleek and elegant design, a powerful 4.0-liter engine, and a top speed of over 230 kilometers per hour. It was also equipped with several amazing features, such as an ejector seat, a bulletproof shield, a revolving license plate, and machine guns. The DB5 was the perfect car for Bond, as it combined beauty and performance, and it also had a secret and mysterious side with its hidden gadgets and weapons. The DB5 was an instant sensation, and it became one of the most iconic and recognizable cars in the world. It was also a huge success for Aston Martin, as it increased the demand and sales of the brand, and attracted new and loyal customers. The DB5 was so popular that it appeared in 6 more James Bond films, including Thunderball, GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, Casino Royale, Skyfall, and Spectre. It was the car that defined James Bond, and that made him a legend. But the DB5 was not the only Aston Martin that James Bond drove. He also drove other models, such as the DBS, the V8 Vantage, the Vanquish, and the DB10. Each of these cars had their own charm and personality, and they also had their own gadgets and features, such as a self-destruct system, a rocket launcher, a cloaking device, and a flamethrower. These cars showed the evolution and innovation of Aston Martin as they adapted to the changing times and needs of Bond. They also showed the diversity and versatility of Bond as he faced different enemies and challenges. These cars were not just vehicles, they were also partners and allies for Bond, who helped him in his missions and adventures. Aston Martin and James Bond have a special relationship that goes beyond a mere product placement. They share a common spirit of adventure, style, and sophistication. They also share a common history as they face challenges and changes, but they always manage to overcome them and reinvent themselves. They're both icons of British culture and heritage, and they represent the best of what Britain has to offer to the world. They're both timeless and modern, and they appeal to generations of fans and admirers. They are both Aston Martin and James Bond, and they are both simply the best. Chapter 5: Winding Roads to Uncertainty. The 1970s and 1980s were turbulent times for the world, as the oil crisis, the Cold War, and the rise of new technologies and markets reshaped the global landscape. The car industry was also affected by these changes, and Aston Martin had to adapt and innovate to survive and thrive. One of the main challenges that Aston Martin faced was the increasing competition from other sports car makers, especially from Japan and Germany. These rivals offered cheaper, faster, and more reliable cars that appealed to a wider and more diverse audience. They also had the advantage of mass production, economies of scale, and technological innovation, which allowed them to offer more variety and value to their customers. Aston Martin had to find a way to differentiate itself and maintain its loyal customer base, which was mainly composed of wealthy and elite individuals who valued exclusivity and prestige. To do so, Aston Martin focused on its core values of power, beauty, and soul, and it continued to produce high-quality and high-performance cars that were handcrafted and customized to the customer's preferences. It also invested in research and development, and it introduced new models and features, such as the V8 Vanquish, the Reforged, and the V12 engine. These cars were meant to showcase the excellence and heritage of Aston Martin, and appeal to the emotions and the senses of the customers. They were also meant to compete in the racing scene and to demonstrate the speed and durability of Aston Martin. However, these efforts were not enough to prevent the financial troubles and changes in ownership that plagued the company. Aston Martin changed hands several times, and it was owned by various investors and corporations. However, these efforts were not enough to prevent the financial troubles and changes in ownership that plagued the company. Aston Martin changed hands several times, and it was owned by various investors and corporations, such as Company Developments, Victor Gauntlet, Peter Lavanos, Ford Motor Company, and ProDrive. Each of these owners had their own vision and strategy for the company, and they tried to improve its situation and reputation. But they also faced many difficulties and obstacles, such as lack of funds, legal disputes, management issues, and market fluctuations. They also had different priorities and interests, which sometimes conflicted with the identity and the culture of Aston Martin. Some of these owners were more successful than others, and some of them left a lasting impact on the company. For example, Ford Motor Company, which owned Aston Martin from 1987 to 2007, helped the company to modernize its facilities and expand its production and distribution. It also supported the company's involvement in the James Bond films, and it launched the DB7, the most successful Aston Martin model ever. The DB7 was a breakthrough for Aston Martin, as it was the first car to be built using modern techniques and materials, such as computer-aided design and aluminum alloy. It was also the first car to be mass-produced and widely available, as it was sold in more than 30 countries. It was a beautiful and powerful car that combined the best of Aston Martin and Ford. But Ford Motor Company also faced its own financial difficulties, and it decided to sell Aston Martin in 2007 to a consortium of investors led by David Richards, the founder of ProDrive, a British motorsport and engineering company. Richards and his partners had a new vision for Aston Martin, and they wanted to make it a global and independent brand. they could compete with the best in the world. They also wanted to restore the original spirit and the values of Aston Martin and to make it more exclusive and prestigious. They also wanted to focus on the environmental and social aspects of the car industry and to make Aston Martin more sustainable and responsible. However, this vision was not easy to achieve, and it also had some drawbacks and risks. For one thing, it required a lot of investment and innovation, which was not easy to obtain and implement in a competitive and changing market. For another thing, it also meant that Aston Martin had to distance itself from some of its partners and customers who had supported the company for a long time and who had different expectations and needs. For example, some of the James Bond fans and Ford customers were not happy with the changes that Aston Martin made, and they felt that the company had lost some of its charm and appeal. They also felt that the company had become too elitist and inaccessible, and that it had forgotten its roots and history. This vision also faced some criticism and skepticism from the car experts and the media, who questioned the feasibility and the desirability of Aston Martin's strategy. They argued that Aston Martin was losing its identity and its edge, and that it was becoming too similar to its competitors, such as Ferrari and Lamborghini. They also argued that Aston Martin was neglecting its core customers and its core products, and it was focusing too much on the luxury and lifestyle aspects of the car industry, rather than on performance and engineering aspects. They also argued that Aston Martin was ignoring the realities and the demands of the market, and that it was isolating itself from the potential and the opportunities of the new technologies and the new markets. These criticisms and challenges put a lot of pressure and stress on Aston Martin, and they tested its resilience and its creativity. Aston Martin had to prove itself and its vision and convince its customers and its critics that it was still a relevant and remarkable brand that could offer something unique and valuable to the world. Aston Martin had to reinvent itself and its products and find a balance between its tradition and its innovation, between its exclusivity and its accessibility, and between its power and its responsibility. Aston Martin had to face the changes and uncertainties of the 21st century and find its place and its purpose in the new era. Chapter 6: Reforged, Revving, Reclaiming the Podium. The 21st century was a time of rapid and radical changes as the world witnessed the emergence of new technologies, trends, and challenges such as the internet, social media, electric cars, environmental issues, and global pandemics. The car industry was also affected by these changes, and Aston Martin had to adapt and innovate to survive and thrive. Under the new ownership of David Richards and his partners, Aston Martin embarked on a new strategy that aimed to make the company more independent, profitable, and competitive. The company invested in new facilities, such as the Gaydon factory and the St. Athan plant, and it increased its production and distribution capacity. It also launched new models and features, such as the DB9, the DBS, the Rapide, the 177, the Vulcan, the Valkyrie, and the DBX. These models were designed to appeal to a wider and more diverse audience, and they offered a range of options, such as coupes, convertibles, sedans, supercars, and SUVs. But Aston Martin did not forget its core values of power, beauty, and soul, and it continued to produce high-quality and high-performance cars that were handcrafted and customized to the customer's preferences. It also maintained its heritage and legacy, and it celebrated its centenary in 2013 with a series of events and special editions. It also continued its involvement in the James Bond films, and it introduced the DB10, the car that was specially made for the film Spectre. Aston Martin also formed new partnerships and entered new markets, which helped the company grow and expand its reach and influence. It partnered with various companies and organizations, such as Mercedes-Benz, Red Bull Racing, TAG Heuer, and the Royal Air Force, to collaborate on various projects and initiatives, such as the AMG engine, the Valkyrie hypercar, the luxury watch, and the Aston Martin Wings program. It also entered new markets such as China, India, and the Middle East to cater to the growing demand and potential of these regions. Aston Martin also returned to its racing roots, and it competed in various motorsport events such as the Formula One, the World Endurance Championship, and the British GT Championship. It achieved remarkable results and successes, such as winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 2017 and 2020, and becoming the World Endurance Champion in 2020. It also revived its F1 team after 60 years of absence, and it signed the four-time world champion Sebastian Vettel as one of its drivers. Aston Martin has come a long way since its humble beginnings in 1913, and it has overcome many challenges and hardships in its history, but it has also achieved many triumphs and milestones, and it has become one of the most iconic and prestigious car brands in the world. It has a rich and fascinating history, and it has a bright and promising future. However, this history and future are not without flaws and risks, and Aston Martin has also faced some criticism and skepticism from car experts and the media, who question the feasibility and desirability of Aston Martin's strategy. They argued that Aston Martin was losing its identity and its edge, and that it was becoming too similar to its competitors, such as Ferrari and Lamborghini. They also argued that Aston Martin was neglecting its core customers and its core products, and that it was focusing too much on luxury and lifestyle aspects of the car industry, rather than on the performance and engineering aspects. They also argued that Aston Martin was ignoring the realities and the demands of the market, and that it was isolating itself from the potential and the opportunities of the new technologies and the new markets. These criticisms and challenges put a lot of pressure and stress on Aston Martin, and they tested its resilience and its creativity. Aston Martin had to prove itself and its vision and convince its customers and its critics that it was still a relevant and remarkable brand that could offer something unique and valuable to the world. Aston Martin had to reinvent itself and its products and find a balance between its tradition and its innovation, between its exclusivity and its accessibility, and between its power and its responsibility. Aston Martin had to face the changes and uncertainties of the 21st century and find its place and its purpose in the new era. Aston Martin had to overcome many obstacles and difficulties, and it had to make some sacrifices and compromises to achieve its goals and aspirations. It had to deal with some losses and failures, and it had to learn from its mistakes and shortcomings to improve its performance and quality. It had to cope with some changes and transitions, and it had to adapt to its new partners and customers to expand its reach and influence. That's it for today. Be sure to check back for more exciting documentaries like this.